Most people quit right before the breakthrough, not because they lack talent, not because the path is wrong, but because of something nobody ever trained them to handle: how the most disciplined minds in history turned pain into precision. There's a pattern hiding inside every story of extraordinary achievement, and it has nothing to do with talent, privilege, or luck. It shows up in the journals of chess grandmasters, in the training systems of ancient warrior cultures, in the routines of elite military units, and in the decisions of the most effective negotiators who ever lived. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The pattern is this: the people who consistently operate at the highest level are not the ones who found a way to avoid difficulty. They're the ones who learned, deliberately, methodically, how to stay functional when everything around them was designed to make them stop. This isn't a motivational claim. It's a structural observation. Think about what separates a chess grandmaster from an advanced amateur. It's not just knowledge of openings or tactical patterns. It's the ability to remain calm, clear, and precise in positions of extreme complexity, when the board is chaotic, when the clock is running, when every move feels like a risk. The grandmaster has trained not just the mind for chess, but the nervous system for pressure. That's a completely different kind of preparation. The same principle appears in military strategy. The most effective units in history weren't necessarily the largest or the best equipped. They were the ones trained to maintain operational clarity under conditions that caused cognitive collapse in everyone else. Fatigue, fear, uncertainty, noise. These weren't factors to be eliminated. They were variables to be trained within. Here's what this means for you right now, in the context of your own goals and ambitions. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is almost never a knowledge gap. It's a tolerance gap. It is the distance between what you currently know how to handle and what your goal actually requires you to sit with. High performance, in its purest form, is not about doing more. It's about staying present when presence is uncomfortable. It is about keeping your focus sharp when every signal in your environment is telling you to step back, take a break, or wait for better conditions. In that capacity, more than intelligence, more than strategy, more than any specific skill, is what this channel is built around excavating. If this kind of depth is what you've been looking for, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. What ancient warriors and elite investigators have in common that nobody talks about? It seems like they have nothing in common. One lived in a world of battlefields and iron discipline. The other operates in conference rooms, crime scenes, and negotiation tables. But when you dig beneath the surface, when you study the actual mechanics of how both operate under pressure, a single thread connects them. Both were trained to stay inside discomfort long enough to extract information from it. The warrior traditions of ancient cultures weren't just about physical conditioning. The most sophisticated among them, the ones whose influence still echoes in modern military doctrine, in leadership philosophy, in strategic thinking, understood that the body was secondary to the mind. Physical hardship was a vehicle. The real target was the nervous system. The goal was to expose the trainee to enough controlled adversity that their baseline for normal shifted permanently upward. When your baseline shifts, what used to break you becomes manageable. What used to paralyze you becomes just another condition to operate within. Now apply that same logic to the investigator. The skilled investigator encounters a case where the evidence contradicts itself, where the obvious answer is wrong, where sitting with uncertainty is the only honest option. The untrained mind rushes toward closure, any closure, because ambiguity is cognitively uncomfortable. The trained investigator does the opposite. They've learned to treat discomfort as signal. The more a case resists resolution, the more carefully they look. That's not a personality trait. That's a trained response. And here's where it gets interesting for anyone trying to build something real in their own life. Most of us face our version of this every single day. The project that isn't working the way we expected. The skill that isn't developing as fast as we thought it would. The situation that keeps returning more complex than we thought we'd resolved it. In every one of these moments, the instinct is the same: find the exit. The difference between the person who builds something lasting and the person who stays permanently stuck at the same level is not that one of them has better ideas. It's that one of them has learned to read discomfort differently, not as a stop sign, but as a coordinate, a location marker that says, this is exactly where the work that matters is happening. Drop a comment if you've ever felt this, that moment when you were right at the edge and turned back. Because what's coming next is going to reframe why that happened, why your brain interprets growth as danger, and how to rewire that response. Here is something that sounds counterintuitive, but is backed by everything we know about how the human nervous system actually works. Your brain genuinely cannot tell the difference between the discomfort of real danger and the discomfort of real growth. To the threat detection system buried deep in your neurology, they feel identical. This is not a flaw. It's an ancient feature that kept your ancestors alive in environments where hesitation could be fatal. But in the modern world, where the most important challenges aren't physical threats but sustained cognitive and emotional difficulty, this feature becomes a filter that blocks exactly the experiences that would move you forward. Every time you sit down to do something that matters and feel that wave of resistance, that pull toward distraction, that sudden sense that maybe now isn't the right time, that's not weakness. That's your nervous system doing its job. The problem is that it's doing a job that was designed for a completely different environment. The high performers across history who have left the deepest marks not just in warfare or athletics, but in philosophy, science, business strategy, and creative work, all developed in different ways a relationship with that signal that most people never build. They learn to recognize it not as permission to stop, but as confirmation that they're in the right territory. The Stoic philosophers built entire mental frameworks around this idea. They practiced voluntary exposure to difficult, not as self-punishment, but as calibration. By deliberately sitting inside scenarios that produce discomfort, they trained the mind to remain steady there. Over time, the scenarios that once triggered avoidance simply stopped having the same power. This is the mechanics behind what people call mental toughness, mindset shifts, or discipline. It's not a personality type you're born with. It's a practice you build through repetition, through intention, through the willingness to stay inside states that most people treat as exits. And here's what's most important. This isn't about suffering more. It's about suffering smarter. It is about learning to distinguish the discomfort that he's asking you to rest from the discomfort that he's asking you to push. That distinction, developed with precision and clarity over time, is one of the rarest and most valuable cognitive skills a person can build. If this is shifting how you think about your own limits, hit the like button. It helps this channel keep going deeper on exactly this kind of content. There's a question that rarely gets asked directly, but it sits underneath almost every conversation about success, achievement, and what separates the people who build something extraordinary from those who don't. The question is, what are they actually doing differently? Not on the surface, but structurally, at the level of how they process experience. The answer, when you look at it through the lens of history, psychology, and strategic pattern analysis, is both simpler and more demanding than most people expect. They've built a different relationship with time and side discomfort. Most people experience discomfort as an event. Something happens, a failure, a setback, a long period without visible progress, and the instinct is to treat it as an anomaly, something to fix, escape, or move past as quickly as possible. The goal becomes returning to the comfortable state as fast as possible. The high performer has learned to experience discomfort as an environment, not an event to survive, but a terrain to navigate. This shift changes everything, because if discomfort is an event, your only options are to endure it or escape it. But if discomfort is an environment, you can study it, learn its patterns, and develop skills that work specifically within it. Consider how the greatest military strategists operated. They didn't win by having superior resources in every battle. Many of them won precisely because they had fewer resources, and had learned to operate with clarity and creativity inside conditions of scarcity and pressure that caused their opponents to make decisions driven by panic rather than precision. The discomfort of disadvantage became their sharpest tool. The same dynamic appears in elite athletic preparation. The training that produces extraordinary performance doesn't happen in the comfortable zone. It happens at the edge of what the athlete can currently sustain, and slightly beyond it. That zone, where the body and mind are working at the limit, is the only place where real adaptation occurs. Comfort produces maintenance. Discomfort, when intelligently applied, produces transformation. What's remarkable is how consistently this pattern appears across domains that seem to have nothing in common. The scholar who produces original work, the entrepreneur who builds something that lasts, the negotiator who consistently finds leverage where none seem to exist, all of them have learned to spend more time in uncomfortable cognitive states than their peers are willing to. Not because they enjoy suffering, because they understand what that terrain produces. And if the only real edge left is the one most people refuse to develop, we've arrived at the part of this conversation that requires the most honesty. Not about history, not about strategy, but about your now, a life you're actually living. Here's what all of this points to when you follow the thread all the way through. In an era where information is free, where access to knowledge has never been more equal, where strategy and tactics can be learned by anyone with an internet connection, the variable that actually determines outcomes is no longer what you know. It's how long you can stay inside the process of becoming. That's the real competitive edge. And it's the one that's least discussed, least taught, and least developed, because it's the most uncomfortable to confront. Think about your own experience. How many times have you started something that mattered, moved through the early phase of excitement, hit the wall where progress slowed, and the path forward became unclear, and quietly, without announcing it, stepped back? Not because you failed, not because the goal was wrong, but because the discomfort of not knowing, of not yet being good enough, of watching results lag behind effort, became more than you were prepared to hold. That's not a character flaw, it's the default. It's what the vast majority of people do, at every level, in every domain. The ones who don't, the ones who stay inside that murky, unclear, uncomfortable middle space long enough for something real to emerge, are not fundamentally different kinds of humans. They've simply developed, through practice or through necessity, a tolerance for that specific state that others haven't yet built. And here's the part that should change how you see everything going forward. That tolerance is trainable. It's not a gift. It's not a personality trait you either have or you don't. It's a capacity that develops the same way every other capacity develops, through deliberate, consistent exposure to the conditions that produce it. The people who go furthest in any pursuit are rarely the most gifted at the start. They're the ones who stayed the longest, who showed up when showing up was the hardest thing, who kept their focus and mental clarity intact when the environment was designed to take both. If this video shifted something in the way you see your own potential, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's a lot more to uncover. And drop a comment below telling me which part of this hit closest to home for you, because the next layer goes even deeper.